Okay. Kristen, I always do what you tell me to do. So I'm ready. We're ready to go. We're ready to go. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Grand Rounds this morning. Um, before I go into the land acknowledgement and introduce our speakers, just to let everyone know, CHEO in Ottawa is hosting the Canadian Pediatric Society meeting that's beginning today. So lots of excitement here. And as part of that, we have the National Resident Research Competition taking place at CHEO. I can't remember, it might be in the W rooms. I have to double check. But so if you're around and have an opportunity to pop in and want to hear what's happening across the country with regards to resident research, it's a great opportunity.
Yeah,
So,
Jason, just to interrupt. It's over in the
sure.
amphitheater at RGN.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so I'll be judging. I think you may be as well, but I would encourage anyone who can go over even for some of the sessions. It's going from 12:30 to 4:30.
Thanks very much, Pranish. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The people of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and we honor them in this land. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. CHEO also honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and their valuable past, present, and future contributions to this land. So it gives me really great pleasure to introduce our speakers today, Dr. Nirav Thacker and Courtney, who are going to speak about our sixth core at the Research Institute, our clinical trial access core, and our clinical investigation unit. For those of you that don't know Nirav, he's a pediatric hematologist oncologist, neuro-oncologist at CHEO, an investigator at CHEO-RI, who has a focus not only on neuro-oncology, but also on NF1-associated tumors. His clinical and research work centers on improving outcomes for children with brain tumors through innovative models of care and an integration of clinical trials into routine practice. A central focus of Nirav's work is advancing equitable access to high-quality care and novel therapies through clinical trials. He is currently leading 2 international multi-center clinical trials for children with brain tumors across Canada, and is involved with a number of global trials to include sites specifically in low and middle income countries. His work aims to reduce geographic and systemic disparities by expanding access to clinical trials as a pathway to innovation. Nirav serves as the inaugural scientific director of the Clinical Trials Access Core at the RI, where he's focused on strengthening clinical trials infrastructure, supporting investigator-led research, and expanding access to early phase and innovative therapies. Jennilea Courtney is the Director of Research Operations within the Office of Research Services at the CHEO-RI and serves as the Operations Director for the new Clinical Trials Access Core. In this role, she leads research operations with a focus on advancing the organization's strategic research priorities. She oversees key areas including quality assurance and regulatory compliance, grants and awards, patient and family engagement, and research navigation, and provides oversight of the RI's institutional approval processes while supporting research teams and mentorship initiatives. Through this work, as well as the development of the Clinical Trials Access Core, she focuses on strengthening operational effectiveness and creating the conditions that enable research teams to deliver high-quality, impactful work that improves patient care and experiences. So they really are a power team, and the title of that presentation this morning is Reimagining Access, Building a Clinical Trial Ecosystem for Every Child. Thanks, Nirav and Jennilea. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jason, for your kind introduction and not letting out the secrets. So once we are able to load the talk, we'll begin with that.
We can see it well.
Yes. Okay. Great. So as Jason said, I think the title of our talk today is Reimagining Access, Building a Clinical Trials Ecosystem for Every Child, because we do have clinical trials happening at CHEO, but they're happening with groups. And what we're trying to do is trying to build an entire trials ecosystem. So with that, we'll begin with the next one. So we didn't plan this. This was purely coincidental. Today is actually the International Clinical Trials Day. We were planning this talk from some time, and this is the date that we landed on. And then maybe the stars were aligning, right? So this is the week of Clinical Trials Week, and today's day specifically is the Clinical Trials Day, which is actually celebrating James Lind. because historically he was the first person who actually systematically considered what would now be a clinical trial. On board the HMS ship, there were sailors who were getting scurvy. So he systematically put them into two groups, with one getting fruits, another not, and then that way he was able to identify, citrus foods, helping with that, eventually vitamin C. So it still goes on with the systematic thought process, right? And how you do things is a clinical trial, and it isn't as complicated now today as we are see it to be in today's world. Okay, Jelly, next one. And also, just to highlight, this time's theme for clinical trials week is also aligning very well with what our goals are. If generally you can go one slide back, which is actually stronger together for advancing therapy with clinical trials without borders, because that has been a real issue and especially challenges we face here in Canada. Okay. So quickly, our objectives will be to understand the current landscapes in Canada and Ontario, understand how it came to be, the clinical access code with CHEO, and the role that it has in advancing care and research impact. And we'll also talk about the key supports and services that are already available to the researchers through this core and CIU, and also things which we are looking forward to in the future. So, like most other things that happen in medicine, things start with patients, and this is one of the unfortunate stories that I had with my patient, and unfortunately, it's a reality for too many. So, we had a patient with aggressive brain tumor who had a poor outcome, but did have available a therapy on clinical trials, but it wasn't in Canada. The family had to travel to US. So it was a very difficult choice for the family because they knew there was a treatment which was potentially innovative and could give them hope. But also it was challenging for them to travel with the condition that the kid was in. So for that reason, access wasn't possible. And unfortunately, the family and the child could never get that treatment. And obviously, we'll never have that moment back. So the science existed, but the access did not. And this is what was a realization that although we are having trials, I think we need to do better and need to make a system that actually gets clinical trial easy to get here and also more attractive for the ones who do trials, industry consortiums to actually come here. And again, this is not an isolated story just with oncology or for my patients. It is a very common scenario. I'm sure most of you who do rare diseases and pediatric specialties will agree that it is a very common scenario across communities where we might have a potentially innovative therapy or a newer therapy, but the family who could not access it because of where it was offered. So I think it's important for all of us to understand, I think a lot of us do in medical practice, is that clinical trials, at least in modern era of medicine, is an essential part of care. And they are actually transforming how innovative therapies reach children. Um, and as I said earlier, the clinical trials were more, with cytotoxic therapies, with just not very precision oriented. So not always focused on efficacy, and a lot of them were just to establish safety. Some of them were tokens because the drug mandates, regulatory authorities mandated having some pediatric data. But in today's era with precision medicine, with targeted immunotherapies and gene therapies coming up, and also very adaptive and newer trial designs, it actually is meaningful treatment for children, especially for ones whom we don't have very good options. And in some cases, they are such sort of advanced therapies or future therapies that children can access today. So they are increasingly where tomorrow's therapies are first emerging and how we are having access to that. Access is a central piece of this, especially in Canada, as the pathway for drug approval is longer than what it is in some other jurisdiction, and for some of them partly for the right reasons because it has to be vetted, but it leaves that much longer time frame for our kids without having access unless they are able to get it over a clinical trial, which is providing the drug, or we wait for compassionate access from the drug companies, but that is often unsustainable and also not always guaranteed because it depends on the goodwill of the company. And just to highlight a stat, like less than 10% of rare diseases do not have actually approved therapies for them. So they are the only 10% of them have it approved, so rest of them don't. So there's a big gap, especially for rare diseases and difficult to treat diseases, including cancers. And we already know with our experience from historically groups that have been doing clinical trials, or where clinical trials is actually an integral part of practice, like oncology, that the clinical trials participation itself improves outcomes. It is just because how systematically and methodically they are done, how safety of the patient is primary in mind, how protocolized it is. Just by participation on clinical trials, outcomes improve. And at least over 5 decades, there has been a 50% reduction in overall survival and morbidity of children and adolescents with cancer by participating in trials. So clinical trials have already changed the future for children before and continue to do so. And even today, it's even more robust than what it should be before. So increasingly, access to innovation now depends on access to clinical trials, and they are a bridge that actually bridge bench to bedside and help translate the discoveries from lab in a safe and a meaningful way to our patients. Go to next. And it is not restricted to any single specialty now. We are in an era of pediatric therapeutic revolution where almost every specialty, as you can see, has got newer innovative therapies available for their children, either which have been approved or ones which are in development and in the phase of trials, with cellular therapies, gene therapies, immunotherapies, and targeted therapies, and a lot of others with bioengineering. So a lot of novel therapies are actually across spectrum now and not restricted in specific specialties. And most of these therapies first become available through clinical trials. And that is the only safe way we get it for our children. Okay. So coming to where the access gap is in Canada. So innovation is highly concentrated in south of the border, where there are a lot of newer drugs and biologics being developed. And that obviously gives them access in trials and also quicker access when they're approved. Um, so innovation does exist, and as we discussed in first slide, but access remains inequitable. And in Canada, we already have limited trials as compared to our southern neighbor and even as compared to Europe. And even those trials are not available equitably. They are sort of focused in certain high volume centers with our vast geography that actually leaves a lot of families with need to travel. And at CHEO, as I said, we've always had trials. At any point, we do have around 100 trials, but that is still, as you can see, right, less as compared to what overall are available for our families, for which we can avoid their travel. And especially, the families who need to access to innovative therapies on trial already are going through a lot on the medical side with a lot of burden on the financial end as well. And then challenges further amplified in Canada by the longer pathway that we have, right? Because till we get access, we're always dependent on trials to get it. So for many children, access to innovation is still dependent on geography, infrastructure, and the local system capacity. And we are hopefully trying to change this, not only at CHEO, because it's not a problem specific to a system. It is a problem that we are trying to address nationally. And as you will see in next slides, Jenny will highlight what's happening nationally. There's a lot of recognition happening right now. So it's the right time to get right on the wave and actually start leading things rather than following them on the curve.
Sorry, everyone. I just needed to stop presentation mode because I did hide my toolbar and I wasn't able to unmute myself. But there we go. Wait a second. Perfect. Okay, so Canada is globally recognized for high quality clinical trials. As many of you know, we benefit from a really strong academic health sciences center. We have very experienced clinical researchers and a well-established research network. Our publicly funded healthcare systems and diverse patient populations also create a strong foundation for impactful research. However, despite these strengths, there are persistent system level challenges that exist. And, the biggest one is that fragmentation across our provinces, where each jurisdiction operates differently. And so this leads to lengthy startup timelines And it also means that not all centers can participate equally. On top of that, as Nirav alluded to, the regulatory complexities and global competition makes it harder to attract and run clinical trials here. Um, so this results in us, having high quality research capacity, but we're not scaling it effectively. And so ultimately, as Nirav mentioned, this limits the access for our patients and families, even within our own country. When we look more closely even at Ontario, you'll see a very strong potential for clinical trials environments as well. And we've had a lot of growth actually in the number of active clinical trials in Ontario. And currently, based on the CHEO data, we have over 5,000 active clinical trials. Half of those are industry-sponsored clinical trials. As many of you know, Ontario is home to some really solid talent, and we have, approximately half of Canada's top research hospitals right here in the province. Additionally, an interesting stat is that we have 2 times more clinical trial per capita than in the US. And again, speaking back to the talent, we do also have 70,000 plus annual STEM graduates that will hopefully continue to feed into this strong ecosystem. So recognizing these challenges and opportunities, there are several important provincial and national initiatives working to improve the system. So Clinical Trials Ontario is, many of you probably know this if you've done clinical trials that are run at multi-centered, that they support the central RED, but they are also working to improve the study startup and efficiency. And so they have a new initiative, which CHEO is a part of, and I'll speak a little bit more about this later, called Quick Start. And this is looking to get certain clinical trials that we're partnering with industry for them to be up and running within 45 days. So it's a very high goal. I will share that at CHEO, typically it takes us about 120 days to get our clinical trials up and running. So there's work to do there. ACT, Accelerating Clinical Trials, is at the national level, and they are working to strengthen the infrastructure across Canada. And they are, one of their flagship initiatives right now is CAN Review. And so much like CTO, where you could do a provincial application for Ontario, CAN Review actually looks for a centralized ethics review all across Canada. My CERN, is pediatric specific, and it's helping to increase the collaborations across the Canadian institutions, and also building additional research capacity. So they do offer support if you need support with getting your ethics application, or especially when it's investigator initiated, and we need support for monitoring of our different sites. Rare Kids Can is a part of my CERN, and it's also looking to connect specialties across Canada, but with a focus of pediatric rare disease and trials. And again, they are doing some advocacy work as well to help improve access and coordination equity. And so they are working with Health Canada and providing some feedback to government. In addition to infrastructure, the system level enablers are also critical. And so I've just listed a few here. I'm sure there's many. I will note that I'm pleased to hear that anytime I hear of a new organization, they seem to have a clinical trial working group or some kind of stream that's looking to advance this. But Healthcare Can, and we were very pleased that they were able to join us at our grand opening of our clinical investigation unit. But they right now have a clinical trial working group, and they're really looking to shape the federal and provincial health policies and to advance the clinical trial capacity and system competitiveness. So looking to try to break down those barriers to allow us to bring more trials to Canada. CHR is also investing in clinical trials infrastructure and national coordination. So there's been new investment into clinical trials specifically, and they actually support ACT, so the CAN review project that I mentioned earlier, and actually they do support Rare Kids Can as well, which are all looking to modernize, the clinical trials operation. And Health Canada Although, many, especially in pediatrics, feel like the modernization of the regulations has missed the mark. They are looking to move forward with implementing a risk-based and proportionate clinical trial regulation, which, will help reduce those burdens and hopefully accelerate clinical trial activation. And again, we're involved with lots of advocacy, especially to further challenge Health Canada to reconsider some of the modernization to specifically better support pediatric trials. So there's many things going on at the national and provincial level, but we need to look even closer right here at home and ask ourselves whether we're equipped at the institution level. So with all of these new opportunities, are we ready to fully leverage these new infrastructures? Are we ready to accept these new trial opportunities and act on them effectively? And most importantly, are we going to be able to enable our patients to access these trials right here at home?
So that brings us to the origin of the CTA, the Clinical Trials Access Core, and obviously the CIU, which is the first initiative under it. So when we were looking internally, and especially with my sort of experience with getting the study started up, and then connecting with the people, there has been an outstanding investigator-led programs here at CHEO. There have been divisional expertise, right? Because most of the times ONC does a lot of trials anyways as a part of their portfolio, and there have been individual trial efforts. So there has been really areas where there has been great clinical trials expertise, but that's been more fragmented in the areas that have been there, and it's never been sort of an ecosystem within CHEO where it was easier for everybody to do it, and therefore the trial activations and operations were always very isolated. So when I was going through the process and we spoke with a lot of other people, and also in talking to other investigators who highlighted the challenges that they even thought with the thought of clinical trials, right? Because I think we need to understand in the current academic environment, all clinical trials is a lot of effort for a clinical person and the time that it takes without the conventional sort of recognition or impact that it has, which is generally through publications. Because for trial, you will work for 5 years, 8 years, and then you will get a paper. Unlike some of the other lab and biology work, which also takes equal efforts, but with regulatory and additional efforts which are in there, I think it isn't very attractive to an academic setup unless there is real motivation or there is real ease of doing clinical trials. So with that common realization, we came together as a working group, which was very organic and grassroots levels, which included, sort of long-time investigators who have now well established because they knew the challenges through the system, as well as the newer ones who were trying to get through it. And together with Jennilea from operations side, we actually put forward a white paper for CHEO RI and submitted it to RI. And again, like fortunately aligning at the same time, CHEO RI had also come out with their strategic plan with accelerating discoveries being one of the core routes from there. And it aligned very well with what we had submitted in the white paper with our vision for clinical trials, ecosystem building at CHEO, and what we needed to do. And with that, it actually gave birth, thankfully, with RI's recognition, CHEO's recognition, and with investment from their end to the new core. And I would really like to thank the other members who were part of the group as we then transitioned them to the advisory committee of this new clinical trials access core, and aim with having trials, more infrastructure and trials for patients closer to home. And the goal of this was never to replace the successful programs which are already ongoing. It was always to learn from them because how they have navigated the system, but also the challenges that they face, and then create the infrastructure that would enable more investigators and more children here to access innovation. So the vision of the core, when it established, and it still stays the same, is to develop an entire ecosystem to enable innovation and expand access to every child here closer to home. And what we were trying to do, and what we are trying to do now is apply the 1% rule, which is rule of continuous improvement, to each of the steps in the life cycle of the trial. So I think we are doing really well. As Jennilea said, we are probably at one of the good time points of opening trials at 120 days. But how we can make those small improvements so we do even better and make things even more efficient, because I think we need to recognize that numbers is not always our strength. And because the trial enrollment as well as access is very competitive, the way we actually can attract them is by being more efficient and more nimble than other higher volume institutes can be, because time is a parameter as well, which is vital importance for the sponsors when they're looking for opening clinical trials. Um, One of the other visions is to strengthen the existing programs which are there, because as I said, when we met and spoke with everyone, there are obviously, even for the established groups, there are some system level challenges which they face, which is not under their control, and obviously need support from leadership as well as other teams to make sure that we are able to deliver on the trials that we have promised with our sponsor responsibility as well. So how we sort of identify those and help with getting those infrastructure and resources in place, or improve the efficiency where we think we can. And I think a very important vision of this core was how we enable new trialists. Because I think in the current era, how it works is that the sponsors try to look for an established trialist and go there. But if there is a system backing, then I think they are very happy to go where they know that, the trial is more likely to succeed even if they're going with a newer investigator, because the system is actually taking the burden of the trial. Then they're very happy to come. And this builds capacity, this builds resources, and this then makes us able to attract more trials going in future, right? Then because it becomes a cycle and machinery how we do it. And obviously the overall goal of all of this is to see how we expand the clinical trial capacity here and get access to innovative therapies to children and family closer to home, and make it more equitable for all of our children.
Perfect. So underneath the CHEO strategic plan, we do have a pillar that speaks to accelerating discoveries, and this is really, to build infrastructure, to ensure that we are continuously building our capacity to support various types of research. And underneath this pillar, we still do have the strategic objective. We use the OKR framework to create capacity for clinical trials to enhance research excellence and participant experience. And so last year, when this core was just new and really, we hadn't quite formalized it, one of the first things that we knew we needed to bring into place was some dedicated research pharmacists. And so that is something that we're pleased to say that is ongoing. And we're currently looking at hiring the second part-time pharmacist to support research, clinical trials. We also did, as Nirav mentioned, this started with the advisory committee, and then we transitioned it into the advisory committee. And we did formalize this as a new core at the Research Institute, which brings in funding for it, as well as governance structure and some leadership to continue to bring the experiences of our trialists forward to the leadership table. And most recently, we had our official launch of our clinical investigation unit, staffed with a specific clinical trial nurse, which officially launched in April. But I'll dive into each of these a little bit more deeply. So, wanting to formally introduce everyone to our new clinical trial access core. As noted in the objective earlier, one of the key things about creating this core and our clinical investigation unit was to ensure that it was patient and family focused. And so the image on the top here, you'll see this is just a snapshot of what our unit looks like. And so thanks to the comms team and facilities, we've been able to really incorporate many things into the design that makes it friendly for our patients and families. The image below is our clinical trial access core team. So there is May and Pei, who are our clinical trial nurses, of course, Nirav and myself, and Nicole Whitley, who's really been instrumental in helping us get this core up and running, and also acts as our clinical research navigator. So the goal, of our core was really to strengthen our capacity to deliver these clinical trials. And ultimately, we've heard that it can be difficult to navigate the system and also to get these studies up and running. And so the overall goal is really to make these easier and more accessible for, our clinician researchers, as well as our patients and families, and also partners. So our industry partners that we need to bring some of these trials forward. I'll speak about this a little bit more, but of course the coordinated trial space, the CIU, which is has specialized staff, and we're also looking to do underneath the core quite a few streamlined study startup and study improving those processes, as Nirav also mentioned with our 1% rule. So the clinical investigation unit, we just had our ribbon cutting ceremony in April, and we were really pleased to have representation from many of those partners that we spoke about earlier. And this really represents the first centralized support available underneath the core. So the unit falls underneath the broader core. And our plan is that we will continue to build and enhance these centralized resources, really that the additional supports are going to be informed by the advisory committee, those with the boots on the ground that are experiencing the challenges. To ensure that we can support a wide variety of research and trials, we do offer tiers of service within the unit itself. So we of course have the clinic side to the unit, which is staffed with our pediatric nurse coordinator, and so this really enables the administration of IP, as well as any monitoring that needs to be done or different assessments can be done by our nursing staff on this side. We also do have access to phlebotomy. So we have a phlebotomy chair, and this really helps our participants. Really, this is a focus with the participants that when they're coming and already volunteering quite a bit of their time. The last thing we want really them to do is to wait longer in line to have blood work done. And so this unit really operates as a one-stop shop for them in order to get all of their assessments done as part of a clinical trial. And then there's also space rental. We know that there is, quite a few strong trialists who have really strong teams. And so they might not need access to, for example, the nursing supports, but they do need access to the unit itself. So they have availability for that. When researchers are building out their budgets for this trial, we do include, we're on a cost recovery model to support this unit. And, we just wanted to share some early wins. So as we noted, we formally launched in April, but we've really been speaking about this to the research community probably since January. And so just some early wins and momentum. So, already we've had 12 intake forms that were submitted to us that come from across 6 different departments at CHEO. And, while this might seem small when you think about how we typically are running 100 clinical trials at any given time, I think this is a good indication, especially in this short time frame, that there is interest. We do have 4 studies that are onboarded, and already 20 participants have been seen within the unit. And I just always want to share one of the first studies that's going to have IP administration within this unit is a study within endocrinology. And given the complexity of the study, after the IP is administered, the participants do need to stay within the unit for up to 4 to 6 hours. And to do this, and they're actually coming for 12 consecutive days for this length of time. And this happens twice, once at the baseline and once at 6 months. And so when you think about trying to do this within the clinical setting without a dedicated unit, it comes really challenging to do this. And quite frankly, the feasibility of doing this type of trial without this unit would be very difficult. And we're pleased to say that, already this first study that we're supporting has created access for those patients. So what's next? So within this year, again, underneath our Accelerate Discoveries, with continuing to create capacity for clinical trials, we did receive funding to establish centralized research coordinator support for investigators. So this is really for those that might be interested in doing a clinical trial but don't have their own team, or maybe the researcher, has a research team but they're not experienced in running clinical trials, that they can tap in to this centralized resource, and this coordinator will act as the site coordinator along with the investigator. Additionally, as we spoke about, it's not just about infrastructure. This year, we're also really focusing on accelerating our study startup times and efficiency. And so we also do have an objective underneath this Accelerate Discovery pillar, that is to reduce our study startup time. And so we will be transitioning to a unified research management system. And so for anybody that's interacted with Romeo or Agiloft or even our Start Smart, this is going to see all of those systems merge into one system that our researchers will interact with. And our goal is to have 100% of our new studies initiated by the end of this fiscal year. So that is very exciting, but lots of work to do to get there. And we're hoping that by moving to a unified research system, that this will help reduce delays. Additionally, as I mentioned, to align with the Clinical Trials Ontario initiative, we will be establishing a pathway for 45-day quick start initiative. So we've already started with some discussions, specifically with pharmacy and Earl Labs, to make sure that our departmental impact forms can be completed within this time frame. I will note that as part of this initiative, we will be using the CTO application for REB, and there's strict timelines of which the REBs that have signed up to participate need to meet in order to enable this. And we have also established a universal clinical trial agreement, which we have signed on to as well. And this, is done in partnership with pharma. And so this is, universal agreement that should be not going through any rounds of negotiation. And this is to help expedite the study startup process. Perfect. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Nirav to continue to talk about the future.
Yes, and just before going there, also, as Jennilea highlighted, one of the primary sort of ethos of our core is also to mentor and provide mentorship to newer investigators. And already, we have been sort of able to start doing that as well. So we already had one investigator who reached out to us, and we were able to help them mentor through the initial process with the company. And then in a hallway chat, randomly, another investigator said, I was approached for 3 trials, but I thought it was too difficult, so I turned them down. But I'll now go back to them and we'll start working on that. So I think I'm glad already, without having this talk or reaching out formally, which is a vision which we're planning to do in coming weeks, there's already momentum and we see enthusiasm for this. But as I always said, right, it's not just for today that we are working. We are working with an eye of how we build infrastructure and processes. So we are actually leading in future. And the future of pediatric medicine and a lot of the medicine, with how transformative therapeutics is getting, will increasingly be trial enabled. And especially for Canada, where we always have challenge with numbers and how our sort of processes, where, with when it is a single payer system, you have to be more sort of vetting of how you allow drugs and how you cover them. So there'll always be a little bit of time lag. And I think therefore clinical trials access, drugs via them, are going to be central to our sort of philosophy here in Canada. And I think we are sort of already working on things that are technically not even future. They're already here, but we are probably need to sort of take a lead on them. For example, newer therapies like gene therapies, RNA therapeutics, the cellular therapy is also quite ingrained in oncology therapies now. And then also working for future in how we sort of look at how we decentralize trials in future, so make them more efficient, and how we start using AI for enabling trials. And already in the system, parallelly, things were organically happening, where we were already one project working on the trials matching database, which uses AI. Global collaborations, as Jason highlighted earlier, we are already having with one of my studies actually open across low and middle income centers, and we're already trying to formalize them so that we actually make it more robust and a consortium is in place. And if that actually rolls into action, we will be having access to a group with 1.8 billion population, which is almost 5.5 times US population. So that definitely puts us on the map and also helps us get more partnerships and more trials from industry as well. And I think ThinkRare platform is already, from Dr. Boycott, is already much famous. That doesn't need any introduction, and is helping already significant partnerships with industry and how we actually incorporate them to facilitate and bring more trials to CHEO. So the vision is not simply to participate in future of pediatric clinical trials. It is to lead, which we are already doing, and create a global impact from there with our partnerships for every child, not just here, but across the globe. And I think if we work together, we can, because not a single team, not a single investigator, not a single institution can build this alone. But if we all work together, and there is significant institutional commitment as well as leadership, then and as well as the things that we saw going on nationally as well as provincially, if we actually ride on the wave at the right time, we'll not only be able to be a part of it, but we'll be able to lead it. And we have all the ingredients right here at CHEO. We have great clinicians because they are the primary requisite for a clinical trial. We already have a group of really experienced and nice research coordinators. And fortunately, as compared to some other teams where we have a lot of attrition to industry, we have had, fortunate enough, have been, really close group. Operational teams, we have some amazing other cores at RI, which are already complementary to this, including core innovation, because I think industry partnership is very important as well. And we have some amazing scientists, right? Because that is the basic ingredient to fuel trials, and having those discoveries are vital to how we take them to the bedside. And yes, always with institutional and RI leadership, already we can see that changes are happening. But how we sort of sustain this and how we prioritize this is what will determine where we take this in future and how we start leading these things. So with that background and the appeal, we will end here and just end it with a short video of our launch, and then we'll have enough time to take questions.
There was this moment when I'm sitting in the hallway waiting for the results of the MRI where the nurse comes out and she says, "Do you have anyone with you, or can you call a spouse to come? We have news to share with you." And to hear that news that your child has a brain tumor is devastating.
For families like Deborah's, we want to do everything possible, and clinical trials are a huge part of that.
I was treating a kid with aggressive brain tumor who was progressing pretty rapidly. We managed to get access to a newer drug on clinical trial, which was in US. However, the patient was a bit sick, so they couldn't travel to get the drug, and he never got a chance to get that drug. At that moment, I realized that access and equity are real challenges, and we really need to make things happen here.
It was after the second surgery and then the diagnosis that the tumor was growing again that Dimitri had really seemed to lose hope, and this clinical trial meant maybe an option where he wouldn't have to miss school, where he wouldn't end up in the hospital with recovery, just a different option.
Welcome to the Clinical Investigation Unit.
Clinical Investigation Unit is a part within the Clinical Trials Access Core that actually provides a dedicated space and dedicated resource, which is the clinical trials nurse, which is focused on just delivering excellent clinical trial care to patients and families.
When a family walks through the CIU doors, I would want them to feel less stressed, and I would want families to feel like they truly matter and that they deserve respect, kindness, understanding, and high quality care. It would allow families and kids to kind of do like a once one-stop shop, hopefully, less wait times at the lab, having to go to another unit. So I want to see families and kids come to the CIU and see through their clinical trials there as the main support for them.
At CHEO, care and research are deeply integrated. We're committed to excellence here at home, across Canada, and around the world.
Our capacity has grown and we can do much more. Support more trials and bring more life-saving therapies closer to home.
And that's where this clinical trial has meant everything to us, because he has been able to go to school, he has been able to get back out on the basketball court, he has been able to maintain a regular teenage life, and he'll be graduating this year. More access to clinical trials at CHEO does mean less families are going to have to travel. It does mean medical care right in our own city and in our own country.
We are home to some of the world's best pediatric clinicians and researchers. Expanding our clinical trial capacity isn't just about access. It's about using our expertise to strengthen Canada's clinical trial ecosystem.
What it means that we are having innovation as a part of care here, and while we are doing good today, we are already working towards building a better future.
You have a team of people following you and helping you along the way. When there's no more options, this is the greatest gift you can be given.
Spaces like this give families hope, real hope, when it matters most.
And before we go to questions, I'd just like to end on a positive end to the story that we began with. So although we couldn't get therapy for that family, because of advocacy and efforts that started there, we then get access to the drug via clinical trial to the same drug at CHEO now. And we have had patients from across Canada, right from Vancouver to Quebec City, who have actually come to CHEO to get access to that drug.
Thanks so much, Nirav and Jennilea. Thanks to both of you for your tremendous leadership and advocacy and initiative in getting this core off the ground. And as you've highlighted, like all of our cores, this core is really an enabler. It's an enabler of access to care, and that not only fits with our CHEO Research Institute strategic priorities, but also the hospital strategic priorities in terms of access and equity to care across our region and beyond. And at its peak, I think we had 108 people on this Zoom. And so I think that points to the interest. So there's a number of questions. Dr. Hutchinson.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nirav and Jennilea, and thanks for your great work. You mentioned the timeline, the prolonged timeline it takes from inception to publication of a randomized controlled trial, multi-center, international. And I wondered if you can comment on the support here at CHEO for leadership of platform trials with Bayesian methods.
So, thanks, Jamie, for highlighting that, because I think that is one thing where we are sort of hoping we can build expertise going forward, because more and more, and again, because on the oncology side, we are exposed to trials much more, but a lot more specialties are actually getting that now, as I highlighted. We actually need to get an additional statistical support or expertise for designing modern trials, right? Because you're very right. The conventional models have been much more longer, much more time consuming. And the pace at which innovation is happening, actually the question with which a lot of trials start, by the time you're in middle, actually gets irrelevant. And then the recruitment actually significantly goes down, because there is a much more newer innovation, which is more attractive and probably has more backing as well. So I think that is one thing we actually spoke with as well with CRU, because they do have some expertise there, and we were discussing with them of how we can collaborate with them to get more expertise with designing more adaptive trials and Bayesian trials, which are much more adaptive, much more swifter. And we can actually have basket or umbrella studies, which can actually pivot as we find newer therapies with the same trial design, rather than going from scratch from baseline. So that is something which is a part of this, and we have already had discussions, and we'll be working on getting that hopefully soon here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nirav. Dr. Hum.
Hi, thanks so much for this presentation. It sounds like a great initiative and wonderful to see. My question is a little bit, has there been any planning in terms of, I saw the issues around resources for allied healthcare, pharmacy, and we talked a lot about patients and families, which is wonderful. A lot of the other clinical trials groups and institutions that I've seen, and these sort of things have a policy or a mechanism by which physician services are covered or at least remunerated to some degree, because there's always like knock-on effects, that aren't necessarily true, and even as a principal investigator, the amount of time that usually you would have is much larger than, let's say, the 30% that we are afforded in our wonderful academic institution. What type of planning for indirects, charges, that sort of stuff, it has been looked at, and how much of that might come to the clinical staff?
So I can go first, and then hopefully Jennilea and Jason can, and maybe Pranesh can chime in as well. So I completely, echo your sentiments, Stanley, and also feel the pain, right? Because my family is very unhappy with me for giving so much time to trials, because obviously post-clinical time is what time I get to put to this, and I'm almost taking a lot of this home. So it is true, and I think this is an inherent challenge within the Canadian system, where either the trial related funding or grant related funding for the trial cannot actually be used for compensating physician time or buying out physician time. So we have to be much more innovative of how we do that. And again, I think this is sort of hopefully as a core we can advocate for this, but this is obviously a much bigger sort of discussion with the leadership group, and I know because being in some meetings that it has been actively discussed, and there is work going on to see not only for clinical trials but even for other researchers how we innovatively find time to actually get them to focus and deliver on the things that they're doing.
And maybe I can just add too, just for folks to know, this is also something that actually comes up when we're having our clinical trial working groups with folks like healthcare, CAN, and different groups that, there's this real, across the nation and the province to bring more trials to Canada and to Ontario. And, while we can build up the infrastructure and support, it's still the researchers that, need the time, the dedication. And so this is something we've actually shared, at those levels as well. And so there is some advocacy happening in that space, even outside of our institution. Really just to say that it's great that we say we want to bring these, but, who is doing the work? And how do we incentivize, our researchers to want to take on these type of trials?
And on that, Stan, it's a really important question that, part of the promotional work that we've done in launching this core is to raise awareness from pharma to bring in that kind of revenue to support the core, but also raise awareness in the community from donors through the foundation, because there are opportunities, and I've been in discussions, with Pranesh and other department chiefs of how can we, use money to buy out clinician time to be able to support them to do this important work, but also make sure that other clinical needs are met. And so we're looking at those types of solutions. And I know that Pranesh and the other department chiefs are open to those solutions for us to be able to deliver on this mandate.
Just a quick follow-up question, because I didn't actually know, I knew the issue around governmental grants for projects you couldn't use for PIs and that sort of stuff, or physician salary. If it's a private pharma, like let's say AstraZeneca wants to trial something, do those rules also stay part of that?
So typically what we do see like an investigator fee within some of the pharma studies for those visits, but it needs to then be used. So basically it doesn't go to the actual researcher themselves directly. It stays within their research account to then further support other research projects. Maybe if there was a surplus at the end, they could use that funding to support some more of their research projects, but it doesn't go specifically to the researcher themselves as part of their pay. And a lot of that is within the Canadian context and just some of our our ethics and conflict of interest considerations that we have, which we do know is different in the U.S. But so yes, there is that line item, but it doesn't go directly to the researcher.
And just to follow up on that, right? And it did come up that, it is challenging because now you can't use it for getting protected time. You can actually use it to get other personnel who get you protected time. So for example, you can hire a nurse, you can hire a nurse practitioner. But the challenge with that is you need to reach a critical volume to actually have that amount of funds to have a sustainable personnel who is going to be with you. Because if you have 1 or 2 trials, you'll never have those amount of funds to then help you do that. And like, when you have 1 kid, it is most difficult. When you have 2, maybe it's challenging. Once you have 3, 4, then they start taking care of themselves. But we need to reach that critical mass with each investigator to reach that model.
I mean, it's clear. I mean, that's kind of one of my follow-up questions was really about bridge funding because clearly clinical trials come and go and, hiring somebody, most people don't want to be hired on just pure clinical trial because they could be dropped at any point in time, and they usually want to have it. And there's not always, one trial, then another, then another, then another. Does the RI within this context for both the people like the allied healthcare and let's say project managers, people that could, fill out all your REB stuff, all that sort of stuff. Is that an option for, like, let's say clinicians like myself, if we decided we're going to try to engage into something like that, but hiring somebody would be difficult because you can't promise them 5 years. You can promise them, 3, and then you're promising them that, you think that down the pipeline there's going to be more work. Is that part of this group?
Yeah, happy, and Nirav, feel free to jump in. But yes, this is exactly what we hope to do this year underneath our strategic plan is to hire that centralized research coordinator. So this, they would be a staff of the RI, but researchers like yourself, if you were doing a trial and needed a coordinator to support that specific study, could then tap into this resource without having to hire your own team. And then, because we know that some folks might not want, right? We do have some that have a career of trials, and so they've really staffed up and they have the team to support that. But there might be one trial, every 2 years that you're interested in participating. And so instead of having to create a whole team, you can tap into these resources. And the nice thing about it too is part of that support is helping getting the study up and running. And I will say one of the biggest things is negotiating your budget. And so you'd have centralized support that's trained, and support of our navigator and the institution that makes sure that they are, the fully qualified to lead these studies. And there's also then benefit for potential research coordinators to be part of this centralized pool, because this gives them then more security in terms of longevity of, they may not be supporting the same study the whole time, but they'll always have a job supporting different researchers.
I would just add to that that this work is an evolution, and as Jennilea mentioned, we have an advisory committee that's made up of a number of different investigators. Karen McCauley, VP of Acute Care, is on that committee, and so we are open to continuing to iterate this process to best meet people's needs. So if there's suggestions, if there's comments, if there's additional people who are interested in joining the advisory committee, please reach out to Jennilea and Nirav. With regards to the letters and negotiating with pharma, please be in touch with me, because sometimes it's very helpful to have an institutional letter that goes back. often as an institution, we can negotiate with pharma in a way that's different than a particular investigator can. And so, we're here to support you. And the last thing I would say, because I see there's a number of division chiefs, et cetera, that are on, is as we have additional CHEO positions and are doing recruiting, this is a recruiting tool. When I've met with many of our incoming physician recruits, they're really interested in having the opportunity to have infrastructure to support clinical trials. So this is very, very exciting to them. And so we look forward to this bringing on additional new recruits and the next generation of clinical trialists here at CHEO. So we are at 9:30. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining and for your participation. And a huge thanks to Nirav and Jennilea for really a stellar presentation and raising awareness and excitement about this. Please complete the evaluation form that's been put into the chat. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Jennilea, to Nirav, to May, Pei, or me, and have a great clinical trials. What is it? International Clinical Trials Day. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.